A little girl went out to play near her home and disappeared without a trace. Her disappearance sparked the largest search operation in the country's history. But despite everyone's efforts, she was never heard from again. For days, there were no answers. But then investigators uncovered a series of disturbing clues that finally revealed the truth behind this dark and disturbing case. April Jones was born on April 4, 2007, in a small British town called McCandley. It was a quiet, peaceful place with a population of just over 2,000, far from any major cities. April was the youngest in the family, with an older brother and sister. She loved spending time with her friends, riding her favorite pink bike around town, and swimming. In 2012, when she turned 5, April started elementary school. She immediately stood out as a bright and determined student, and her teachers adored her. She was also a social butterfly and made friends with other children almost instantly. On October 1, 2012, April went to swimming lessons at a local sports center while her parents attended a school meeting. Afterwards, she invited her friend over, and her parents drove them home. The girls watched a cartoon together, and around 7 p.m., April wanted to go out for a walk. At first, her mother hesitated because it was already getting dark, but April found a way to convince her anyway. She'd done well at school the day before, so as a reward, her mom finally decided to let her go. She simply reminded the girls not to stray too far from home. And with that, April grabbed her bike and set off. About 20 minutes later, April's mom went out to call her at home, but she wasn't anywhere. She immediately panicked. She began searching the nearby streets, hoping to see her daughter. The neighborhood was on the outskirts of town, a small residential area with several apartment buildings. She walked around, checking behind buildings, but there was no sign of April. Finally, she spotted April's friend and rushed over to ask if she'd seen her. Her friend's response sent chills down her spine. The girl told her a car had stopped next to them. April spoke to the driver, got in, and they drove off. Upon hearing this, April's mother panicked and immediately called the police. Within minutes, officers arrived at their home and spoke first with April's friend. She described the vehicle as a gray van and said the driver was a man with dark hair and a beard wearing a green jacket and sweatpants. He had a good look at him because he had gotten out of the van and helped April get in. The mother later explained that April was having a brain seizure, which made it difficult for her to get in on her own. April's friend also said something that seemed strange. She said that April had gotten into the van from the driver's side. The police immediately realized that the vehicle was likely a left-hand drive. This was noticeable because in the UK, most cars have the steering wheel on the right-hand side. April's friend had simply assumed she was getting in the driver's seat, but in reality, she was probably getting into the van from the passenger side, realizing that April had most likely been kidnapped. Police immediately called for backup and declared the incident critical. A massive search operation was launched, and investigators sent out an alert with details about the suspect and his van. News of April's disappearance spread like wildfire, first through the neighborhood and then beyond. Dozens of people gathered outside her home, eager to help in the search. But at that point the crowd actually made things more difficult for the police, who had to go door to door interviewing every resident. Meanwhile, people began sharing the news online, attracting even more volunteers to the area. As the night went on, hundreds of people joined the search, taking to the streets alongside law enforcement. The situation was so urgent that even the local garbage collection service stopped working as every single worker quit their jobs to help search for April. Soon, the case made national headlines. News outlets picked up the story, and the police put out a public appeal asking anyone with information to come forward. They released April's photo and a description of the suspect, and tips soon began to pour in. Sadly, despite extensive efforts, the search yielded no results. In the early hours, they searched the entire town, but there was no sign of April. The next step was to search the surrounding forests and fields, but that was easier said than done. By then, it was pitch black outside and it had started to rain. The terrain around the town was rugged and difficult to navigate, and the officers knew they wouldn't be able to cover much ground during the night. Still, they refused to stop. The search continued into the morning, and as dawn broke, more volunteers joined. Some had even traveled from other cities to lend a hand. Meanwhile, the police stepped up their efforts, posting missing persons notices on billboards outside the city, hoping to get some leads. As news of the case spread across the country, the police were inundated with calls. But most of the reports led nowhere. That morning, one name kept popping up. A name mentioned by multiple callers. It was local resident Mark Bridger, 46. He quickly became a person of interest for several reasons. First, he matched the description of the suspect. Second, he was one of the few people in town who drove a left-hand drive vehicle. But the biggest red flag was that someone had spotted Bridger's car near April's neighborhood, right around the time she disappeared. When the police began investigating Mark Bridger's past, they discovered a lengthy criminal record, though his crimes were mostly minor or moderate. He had been arrested multiple times for assault, theft, and various offenses such as driving without a license. Detectives started tracking him down and found a few addresses where he might be staying. They sent officers to all of them at once, but Bridger and his car were gone. Then, a few minutes later, detectives had a breakthrough. A police helicopter spotted him walking his dog not far from his home, but what really stood out was his demeanor. The helicopter had been circling for almost half an hour and he never looked up once. Shortly afterward, a police officer approached Bridger and asked him to identify himself. He gave his name and immediately added, "I know what this is about." The officer then asked the question everyone wanted answered. "Where's April?" Bridger replied, "It was an accident. I hit her with my car." He was arrested shortly thereafter and taken to the police station. He continued talking on the way there, even though the officer hadn't asked him any further questions. He claimed he had no idea where April was because he was unconscious. According to him, after he accidentally hit her with his car, she was unresponsive. He panicked, put her in his car, and tried to administer first aid, but it was no use. He then said that for hours everything was empty, and when he arrived, April's body was gone. Bridger insisted that after realizing what had happened, he spent the entire night searching for her, wandering through forests and fields. He also claimed that he only discovered April's identity that morning, when he saw the news reports about her disappearance on TV. Naturally, the detectives didn't believe Bridger's story because there were too many inconsistencies. First, there was April's friend who had seen the whole thing. She clearly remembered April talking to the driver and getting into the van with his help, fully conscious, but Bridger insisted he had hit her with his car and let her get in while she was unconscious. So, her version didn't match the eyewitness account. Then there was the whole blackout thing. It seemed far-fetched in itself, but what made it even more suspicious was what the police discovered shortly after April Bridger's disappearance. He had shaved his hair and beard. It seemed a clear attempt to alter his appearance and avoid detection. However, Bridger stuck to his story. When detectives pointed out the inconsistencies, he changed his attitude slightly. Claiming to have been very drunk that day, which in theory could explain his alleged blackout, he also insisted that although he did not remember where he had put April's body, he was sure that she had died in a safe place. No matter how much the investigators pressed him, they could not get the truth out of him, so they shifted their attention to his house. The moment they entered, they were hit by a strong smell of cleaning products. The house was also unpleasantly warm. That's when they noticed the wood-burning stove in the living room. It had clearly been burning for hours. Forensic teams collected the ashes and sent them for analysis. But other than that, there were no obvious clues. No trace of April, no personal effects, nothing. However, when forensic scientists examined more closely, they found traces of blood, and lab results later confirmed it was April's. Next, investigators turned their attention to Bridger's car. If his story about accidentally hitting April with his vehicle was true, there should have been evidence to support it. But there wasn't. There was no blood inside the car, no exterior damage, nothing to suggest an accident. Once again, his version of events didn't add up. Then came the results of the analysis of the ashes in the fireplace. Forensic experts found 17 human bone fragments, all belonging to April. Another bone fragment was also found in the bathroom drain. This confirmed the heartbreaking truth. April was no longer alive. But detectives didn't believe Bridger had succeeded in completely destroying her. Her remains. It was much more likely that she had taken what was left and hidden it somewhere. So, despite the grisly discovery, the police continued their search, determined to find what was left. The news that April was most likely dead shook the community. Until then, people had hoped she would be found alive. Now the focus of the search had shifted. Hundreds of volunteers and police officers were no longer looking for a missing girl, but her remains so that her family could bury her. By then, the search operation had become something massive. In fact, it went down in history as the largest in the country's modern history. Along with local volunteers, hundreds of professionals from various emergency services joined in. They scoured the most rugged terrain, rivers, forests, lakes, determined to find any trace of April. Meanwhile, investigators continued digging for evidence linking Bridger to the crime. When they examined his computer, they found something truly disturbing. It was filled with illegal content involving minors. Even more disgusting, he had saved photos of victims from other high-profile cases. In addition, they found dozens of images of local children, including April and her older sister. It appeared he had downloaded their photos from social media. Then, investigators discovered something even more disturbing. April's older sister revealed that just a few months before the abduction, Bridger had sent her a friend request on social media. She had mentioned it to their father, who immediately recognized the name. He had known Bridger since the early 1990s, but he had lost contact over the years. The request struck him as odd, because Bridger, a grown man, would have wanted to have a connection with his teenage daughter. Trusting his instincts, he told her not to accept it. It's also worth remembering that Bridger was a father himself. He had 6 children with 4 different women. Yet, at the time of April's disappearance, he was living alone. The police discovered a disturbing pattern. Bridger often had relationships with women who had young children. Given the horrific evidence found on his computer, this detail took on a whole new level of importance and only made detectives even more convinced they were dealing with a predator. As police delved deeper into Bridger's past, they discovered that he never stayed focused on any one job for long, constantly switching between different lines of work. He also had a habit of making up stories about himself. He told some people that he had served in the military and even had to change his identity for security reasons. But it was a complete lie. What made it even stranger was that he repeated this claim during police interrogations. He insisted that he had served his country, that he was a good person, and that he would never do such a thing on purpose. Between this and his strange claims about April's death, detectives began to realize they were likely dealing with a pathological liar. No matter how many times his stories turned out to be false, he just kept repeating them. They also discovered something else that supported this theory. Bridger had told everyone he knew that his parents were dead, but in reality they were alive and well. Another interesting detail was that Bridger had broken up with his girlfriend a few days before April's kidnapping. People who knew him said he didn't take it well at all. He started drinking heavily, and that only made him worse. As the police continued to comb through his computer, they found something even more disturbing. Just hours before April disappeared, Richard had texted 3 different women asking to meet, but they had all declined. He then opened and viewed some illegal content from his disgusting collection. At this point, his guilt seemed undeniable. But there was still a big problem. April's remains were nowhere to be found. Desperate for answers, investigators repeatedly turned to the public, hoping that someone had seen Bridger or his car that night. Any small clue could help them retrace his steps and finally figure out what he did with April's body. Finally, a witness came forward with an interesting lead. He reported seeing Bridger the morning after April's abduction, around 9 a.m. The man was walking along the riverbank with a black bag. Investigators also discovered that. Shortly afterward, Bridger had taken his car to a repair shop. The mechanics remembered him well because he had been acting strangely. By then, everyone in town knew about April's disappearance, and emotions were running high. But Bridger spoke about the case as if he were a grieving parent. He was on the verge of tears, speaking as if the missing child were his own. His reactions stuck with the operators. She was overly emotional, almost theatrical, and something just wasn't right. Following this new lead, search parties concentrated their efforts along the river, hoping to find some sign of April. But no matter how thoroughly they searched the area, they still found nothing. Realizing that April's body might never be recovered, detectives made a difficult decision. They charged Bridger with murder, based on the overwhelming evidence they already had. With April's blood found inside Bridger's house, the police pieced together the facts. Their theory was that Bridger had lured April into his car under some pretext, then taken her to his house, committed an assault, and killed her. After that, he began disposing of her body. Investigators discovered that Bridger had previously worked in a slaughterhouse. They suspected he may have used those skills to dispose of the body before burning parts of her remains in the fireplace. But forensic experts agreed that there was no way he could have gotten rid of everything, which meant some of it must have been hidden somewhere else. As the case progressed, Bridger was remanded in prison to await trial, which would begin in a few months. Meanwhile, the search teams had no intention of giving up. Despite worsening weather conditions and the exhaustion of the trails, they continued searching, hoping to find April's remains. The prosecution was confident they could secure a conviction even without a body, but they still refused to give up the search. In total, search parties combed 60 square kilometers, or 37 square miles, examining every possible spot where April's remains might have been hidden. But they found nothing. In the end, April's parents had no choice but to bury only the small fragments they recovered from Bridger's house. To honor her memory, they also placed some of her personal belongings inside the coffin. Hundreds of people attended her funeral, many of them traveling from other towns just to say goodbye. During the search, April had become like family to an entire community. And now they had to let her go. In January 2013, 3 months after April's murder, Bridger appeared in court and pleaded not guilty to murder. At the same time, however, he admitted that he was likely responsible for her death. During the trial, he stuck to his version of events, claiming he accidentally hit April with his car, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. He also insisted he couldn't remember where he hid her remains. Yet, Bridger continued to portray himself as the good guy, saying he only wanted to help April after the so-called incident. The trial lasted until the end of May, and the jury eventually found him guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a rather rare sentence in the UK. After the trial, Bridger was transferred to a new prison where he was attacked by another inmate. He stabbed him several times with a dagger, but the wounds were not fatal. 4 years after his conviction, investigators continued to contact Bridger, hoping he would tell them where April's remains were. But he never hesitated, just kept insisting that he didn't remember anything. Then, out of nowhere, the police got a tip from another inmate. According to him, Bridger had confessed, saying he had thrown April's remains into the river near his home. But investigators weren't convinced. If a bag containing human remains had been thrown into the water, it would likely have resurfaced. And since search teams had carefully searched the river for miles, it seemed highly unlikely that Bridger was telling the truth. A year after his conviction, the local government purchased Bridger's home and in November 2014 decided to demolish it. Hundreds of locals, including April's parents, gathered to watch as the house was demolished, right on the spot where it had been taken from them. In 2018, April's family faced another harrowing experience. Her father became seriously ill and suffered from partial memory loss. When he regained consciousness, he began asking his wife why April hadn't come to visit him in the hospital. And so, she had to break the news to him again, telling him that their daughter was gone. In a cruel twist of fate, he was forced to relive the pain of losing April a second time. As for the search for her remains, it hasn't resumed since 2013. Police have said they're willing to resume the search if new information comes in, but so far there's been no progress. It's been more than 12 years since April was abducted, and investigators admit the chances of finding her are slim to none. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section, and don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed my video. Thanks for watching.